Hello and welcome to the Gamers Tavern episode number 49. This week we're adding to our campaign setting series talking about the post-apocalyptic fantasy setting Dark Sun. But before we get to that, we've got a lot of stuff to cover. We're running two contests in the month of May, and you've got 3 chances to win each of them. The first is, well, if you haven't heard, our host Ross Watson is the writer of the storyline of the new game Warhammer 40k Regicide. This turn-based strategy game takes the basic rules of chess and adds a completely new layer of Warhammer 40k insanity on top of it. It's available on Steam now as a pre-release, but if you want codes, we've got 3 of them to give away. One will be given to someone who likes our Facebook page at facebook.com/gamerstavern. One will be given to someone who follows us on Twitter at gamerstavernpc, as in podcast. And one will be given away to someone who has reviewed us on iTunes. If you haven't done all 3 yet, you've only got until midnight on May 15th to do so, so get in gear. Now, we also have an insane prize as well, courtesy of Chris Avalone. Our last episode, episode 48 of the show, was our Kickstarter stretch goal level, where Chris hosted an episode of the Gamers Tavern with a topic of his choice, and he chose the tabletop RPG that he designed to test the rules of the unreleased version of Fallout 3 called Van Buren. And those exclusive, never before seen outside the developer's rules, are available to 3 Gamers Tavern listeners. Do you want to own a piece of gaming history? All you have to do is send an email with the subject line Nuka Break to the address contest@gamerstavern.org and include your name, mailing address, and your best Fallout-themed haiku. 3 of those haikus will win a copy of these notes from the production of Van Buren, the predecessor to Fallout 3. Once again, that's contest@gamerstavern.org with the subject line Nuka Break. Finally, if you're anywhere near the Houston area, and yes, I'm talking to our listeners even in Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, Louisiana, fuck it. If you can get your ass to Houston on the weekend of May 22nd through the 25th, you want to be at Comic Palooza. Gamers Tavern host Ross Watson will be there running a bunch of games, and he will be on a crapload of panels, while Lauren Raber, our social media coordinator, and myself, Daryl Mott Jr., will be going around the convention sucking up as much of the awesomeness as we can. And even the 2 of us aren't enough for everything that's going on under this one roof. Even if you have to stick just to the gaming track, there's more than 4 days worth of awesome stuff to do. And if you even want more, Gamers Tavern is going to be doing a live recording of an episode of the show on Monday afternoon. We'll be dragging as many guests as we can talk into coming to be on the show and talk about their experiences at the convention, taking questions from the audience, and we'll even be doing a few special giveaways. So go to comicpalooza.com to find out more. Yeesh. Okay. Without further ado, grab a drink from the bar and take a seat at the table in the corner, and we'll be right back after this word from our sponsor. Are you looking for a new game to play? DriveThruRPG is the internet's largest source of role-playing games. Enjoy our game table episodes with Shadowrun, Dungeons & Dragons, or Mutants and Masterminds, and you want to join in? Or is World of Darkness, Battletech, or Fate more your thing? Or maybe you just want to check out games from our guests like Accursed and Shinetar, the Savage Worlds settings. Just go to gamerstavern.org/drivethrurpg and you can have a new game to play in minutes. And they also have the largest selection of free games, source books, and starter sets anywhere in the world. Go to gamerstavern.org/drivethrurpg and support the show with every purchase.
The Gamers Tavern podcast is sponsored by Pinnacle Entertainment Group's Savage Worlds game, featuring Deadlands, 50 Fathoms, East Texas University, Weird Wars, and dozens of fantastic licensees. Savage Worlds is fast, furious, and fun.
Hello and welcome to the Gamers Tavern podcast. I'm your host, Ross Watson.
And I'm Daryl Mott Jr.
And Tonight we have Brandon Gensimer.
Hey there.
Joining us as a third chair host, along with a special guest, Mr. Timothy Brian Brown.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thanks.
So tonight we are going to be talking about a great setting called Dark Sun that came out quite a while in the past. It's a really interesting setting that's been very unique, you could say. But before we jump into that, we're going to talk to our guest. Now, Brandon should need no introduction at this point, I think, right?
Fingers crossed.
Daryl, I think we can dispense with the gaming character sheet for Brandon at this point. Is that correct?
Well, you might want to update us on what he's been doing lately.
Well, all right. But this will be the very last time because he is now actually a producer on our show.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But I thought
So
thought he might want to talk about the Runner Hub thing that we were talking about before the
absolutely.
show.
Let's do it, but for the last time. So everyone, all the listeners out there, this is the last gaming character sheet we will require of Mr. Gensimer because he will then be actually on the show. So,
outstanding.
Brandon Gensimer, for the listeners, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to as a gaming character sheet?
A little bit about myself. I got my start in gaming as a whole, working for many of the ubiquitous publishers for the video game industry, Electronic Arts, Activision, Blizzard, Tryon Worlds, a little bit with Ubisoft, a small amount with NCSoft as well. I've done a lot of work on many different video games piecemeal. That's where a majority of my gaming character sheet, so to speak, comes from. Recently, though, I've also contributed to a couple different RPGs. One of them is the Malifaux Through the Breach, In Defense of Innocence. I did a piece for them. It's still In Defense of Innocence, right, Ross? Did
Last I heard, it's called In Defense of. I can't wait till it comes out. Honestly,
yeah,
it's
neither
awesome.
can I.
It's fantastic product.
And lately, I've been one of the administrators and contributors for a Reddit community for Shadowrun called Runner Hub. At time of recording, Runner Hub currently has 677 individual unique users. At any one 24-hour period, about 150 to 200 are active at any one time. They have a GM community of more than 70, and we go through probably 7 or 8, 5 to 6 man runs a day. And it's a really cool thing. There's some house rules and some really interesting stuff about it that I won't get into right now, but that's what I've been doing lately.
Now, quick question about Runner Hub. Is there a preferred... well, actually, can you just tell us basically what your opinion is of the breakdown of the different editions of Shadowrun that they're playing there?
At current, the de facto standard is 5th edition. It is the current edition. We also have things set up. I forgot the word for it. We also have stuff set up for 3rd and 4th edition as well. 1st and 2nd, we haven't really dove into because getting the books is difficult, and most people have moved on from those individual editions. But
yeah, I would not expect to see 1st and 2nd edition guys, but 3rd edition and 4th edition being represented, that's very cool.
Yes. And I absolutely love having 4th edition guys to play with, as I vehemently detest some of the design decisions in 5th, and so being forced to play it kind of sucks. But
well, let's be very clear on the Gamers Tavern podcast. There's no hate.
There is no hate.
So you are disappointed with. That's fair to say.
There we go. I am disappointed with some of the design decisions made in 5th edition.
Thank you, Mr. Gensimer. And where can we find out more about you on the webs?
You can find out more about me right here in Gamers Tavern.
That's right. We will talk to you a little bit more about your Twitch channel and stuff later on, but I want to get to our special guest, Timothy Brown. And the reason why I wanted to get to him kind of second is because Tim, you have had a really long career in this gaming industry. You've actually been with...
It's not that long.
Well, I want to say it's long because you've been with a lot of really interesting companies and a lot of interesting properties during your time. So can you tell us and the listeners about you and the things that you've done in the context of a gaming character sheet?
Sure, absolutely. I have been in the industry for a long time. I'm not on the Mount Rushmore of gaming, but I know where to find it. And my personal history goes all the way back into the deep, dark 1970s, where as a kid I was playing board games and whatnot from Avalon Hill and SPI and those great companies like that, the hex and cardboard counter games. And from those, I learned that the third largest company making that sort of game happened to be just across my hometown. it was little game designers workshop, who at that time hadn't even ventured into the role-playing games. And I started hanging out there playing all those board games that they were creating and doing playtesting for them, which was a really terrific way to grow up.
Really quick, for the listeners, Game Design Workshop is the home of Traveller.
Traveller, right.
It was actually, unfortunately, sued out of existence by TSR during the Lorraine Williams era.
Essentially it was. That was a long time later. But yeah, in the 70s, they were a bunch of college guys making a lot of fun board games and got early into, they were early adopters of the whole brand new role-playing game sort of experience and created the Traveller game that came out just as the Star Wars movie came out in 1976?
That's right.
So
77.
77?
77, yeah, 77 is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Sounds right. And, they thought, well, they've seen Dungeons and Dragons. They thought they could make their own thing and made something that really was a unique experience, and that it didn't really mimic a whole lot of the role-playing tropes like experience levels and whatnot from the Dungeons and Dragons game, but took it in a new science fiction kind of direction. And they had a tremendous amount of success with that. And
Mayday, this is the free trader Beowulf.
That's right. Yeah, little board games. That game just had so many fun, unique little experiences that were attached to the role-playing game, but were their own games in and of their own right. Like you're talking about Mayday there, the board game where you could do the spaceship combat just as its own little game that you could use as part of the role-playing experience or play it completely separately. They had a game called Snapshot, where the little cardboard counters were your individual science fiction adventurers running around in starports or on spaceships and shooting at each other. And the game was just fraught with all these little systems. But I think I'm getting into too much detail there. You want to know more about my, I'll go in broader steps forward from there. So
All right.
I started working at Game Designers Workshop literally as a kid. Published my first thing there when I was just 17 years old.
Wow.
And
getting in the industry at 17, that is amazing.
Yeah, well, really, I was playtesting games for those guys literally when I was like 12 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy, just crazy, but it was a ton of fun, and I ended up working for them for 12 years as an employee at Game Designers Workshop, where I worked on the Traveller game quite a bit, also on a separate science fiction game that came to be known as 2300 AD, that was a more hard science fiction game.
Mm-hmm.
And I also contributed early on to the Space 1889 game, which Frank Chadwick is still publishing in new forms now as very much one of the original steampunk kind of environments. So
that's right.
They did a ton of great work there, just some great guys. But when I got the call from the major leagues, if you will, and had an opportunity to move north from Illinois to Wisconsin and work with TSR, I took it.
Just a really quick aside. Yeah. Really quick aside. There's a fellow Game Design Workshop guy here in Denver, Dave Newton.
Sure, I know Dave.
So yeah, just a really quick aside. I talk to him occasionally about GDW. I'll have to tell him I spoke with you this evening. So.
He and I didn't have a lot of crossover. He was a little later than me for the most part.
Sure.
But yeah, they did a lot of stuff. I left there in 1989, and they soldiered on for another 4 years, I think, after that.
So in 1989, you went to TSR, right?
I did. I got an opportunity to go up there as a pretty much a rookie designer from their point of view. They took me on, and I joined the same time as a lot of people, and that was a much different ballgame, a bigger company with a lot more staff, and there were some things that were very familiar to me, but it was a whole new ballgame. But I got in and very early on started to make my mark as a designer in some of the existing second edition game worlds that they had going on then. And then I got an opportunity to be a ground floor designer as part of the team that put together what became Dark Sun. So that was a big deal for me. Beyond that, I was also a product group manager eventually, and then the director of all creative services at TSR for quite a while, and oversaw the creation of other lines like Planescape and Spelljammer and Ravenloft were all part of my product group and my director level responsibilities to make all of that stuff happen.
That is badass.
Yeah, it was fun.
That's
that was a great place.
You and Jim Ward, right?
Sure, worked with Jim Ward quite a bit. He was vice president there for quite a while, and he and I were good gamer buddies and good friends. He's somebody I stay in contact with even now, and those were the golden days of this business in many ways, the role playing game business. and I got to experience a whole bunch of it, right up front row. So I feel very privileged to have been a part of it in that way. So
right,
always good fun.
So how long were you at TSR for?
I was there for 6 years. 6 years at TSR, and then the writing was kind of on the wall that things were going to change there. So I got out of TSR, started pursuing some other work with other companies. I did some work with FASA in the Chicago area for a while.
Did you work on Shadowrun?
I didn't do any Shadowrun work. I was doing some work with new game properties. They were creating a miniatures game called Crucible that I got involved with, and that changed into some initial design work on what became Mage Knight.
Oh, wow.
As they transitioned over the corporation and folded down FASA. But so many times in my career, the company I was working for, especially in the 90s, would sort of disappear from under my feet.
Yeah.
And my only opportunity would be to move far, far away from where I was living. And I just wasn't at a point in my life where I really wanted to do that. I had my wife and my children. I didn't want to get into the habit of crossing country all the time. So
are you talking about Imperium Games?
Imperium Games had that same problem. We got that going to create the new edition of the Traveler game.
This was T4 or Mark Miller's Traveler.
Right, Mark Miller's Traveler, which became T4. That's one where, in many ways, I started out, just saying I'd be glad to contribute. As other people kind of came and went from the operation, I assumed more and more responsibility to actually get the products out. And then, that thing reached a crescendo and then sort of disappeared again because other people, involved who were involved on the financial end either wanted to take it different directions or.
You're talking about Sweet Pea Entertainment here.
Yeah, Sweet Pea, and I don't have any animosity. Again, it's a no hate zone and there's no hard feelings, but again, the whole project, basically dissolved. And
Tim, just really quick for the listeners,
yeah.
Sweet Pea Entertainment is the guys that own the D&D movie rights, and they made the D&D film.
Courtney Solomon's company.
Courtney Solomon, yeah.
Courtney Solomon, right.
Imperium Games, well, I just got done reading Designers of Dragons, the 90s edition.
Oh, okay.
And there's a big old section on Imperium Games and Ken Whitman and kind of all that. It's kind of sad what happened there. It really is.
Yeah, it's, people start projects like that with high expectations and everybody's going to get along. And then the economic realities usually, force their way into the equation. And some people have become very schedule oriented and other people become very quality oriented. And the divisions can drive a real wedge right down the middle of a good, otherwise, good and productive design team. So.
And does that, I'm kind of curious I want to hear about that with that same, I mean, you're kind of going in the path I was going to talk about anyway, but this leads you to Fast Forward, right?
It was, yeah, there's some gap in there. I did a ton of just basic freelance work for many years that, as that was a good way to live. But we ended up creating Fast Forward Entertainment.
With Jim Ward and Lester Smith.
Jim Ward, Lester Smith, that's right. And we put together a couple of unique products. And then basically folded that into what was becoming more and more profitable at the time, which was all of the D20 stuff that you could make under the OGL.
Yeah, it wasn't Fast Forward one of the few companies that actually got kind of smacked on the wrist for violating the OGL. I found
we never really violated the OGL. We just they would question us always about encounter levels and things like that as we would put them in the game, and we would demonstrate repeatedly, and I have all this paperwork, and it's like, well, we generated it using your rules, and here's what the encounter levels turned out to be. And they would say, well, we think that's too high. Well, it's your rules. You tell me what to do. So
I found an article saying that 4 books had to be destroyed based on.
Oh, no. I think that's completely false.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I was a part of the company from start to finish, and we never destroyed any books.
Okay, well, thank God for that. All right.
No, nothing like that.
Yeah, back in those days, that was right around the time printing costs were going up, wasn't it?
Yeah,
so pulping 4 books would have killed a small company.
Well, the printing costs were going up. I mean, but that's kind of axiomatic of the entire role-playing game experience from its earliest days in the late 1970s, when everything kind of worked in favor of the publisher. That is, the demand was super, super high, and the printing costs themselves were comparatively just rock bottom. It cost dirt to print stuff way back then.
The original D&D was $3 a book.
Yeah, I mean, and the price to make that stuff was just astonishingly low. So, all of those various factors, of course, changed over time as, the audience became smaller and smaller in role-playing games through the card game era and into the computer game era. Those numbers are going down of what you could possibly sell. And then the overall print unit cost was really going up. As paper became more expensive, everything became more expensive. The only thing that became less expensive was the basic production costs of things with the advent of computer technology. I am old enough that the first things I ever designed were on a typewriter, okay? And
now for our kids at home, a typewriter is basically like Word, but it's little keys that punch letters on there, and if you screw up, you have to get white out.
Crazy.
Now, Tim, after D20 and fast forward, what happened then?
I did, I then had another period of basic freelance work before I basically started getting into the computer game industry. I now live in Las Vegas, where I came out to work with Petroglyph Games and Tryon on some games of theirs. And I'm still doing work with Petroglyph, and I'm doing some work also now with Cryptic, and I've done some writing for other computer game companies. So I'm doing a little more in the video end of things these days.
Brandon lives in Las Vegas.
Where you at, Brandon? Don't give an address. Somebody will find you.
Well, that's not that far away.
I know. It's hardly a...
Now,
skip it a jump. Brandon, we have to get together.
Tim, you've also done some work for Pinnacle, right?
Yeah, I'm doing some more role-playing work right now with Pinnacle, where I got asked to be the line developer on their new science fiction series within their Savage Worlds game.
Last Parsec?
Yeah, it's called The Last Parsec, and the first 3 books are just coming out now. They ran a nice Kickstarter that did quite well in just a couple of months ago.
It includes a GM screen with an adventure by yours truly.
Yeah, I've got an adventure in there. I wrote one of the bigger books called Scientorium, which is a really crazy, wild, classic science fiction adventure that I think turned out really, really well.
Now, I was just saying, Tim, you and I worked together on Last Parsec.
Yeah,
and we also worked on Savage Lankmar.
Savage Lankmar, that's right. They picked up a license to do Lankmar, which is Fritz Leiber's classic sword and sorcery fantasy universe. In fact, I think I read somewhere where Fritz Leiber is actually credited with creating the term sword and sorcery.
Huh.
Yeah, I can't really corroborate that, but an interesting side note. I mean, I'm glad to work on Lankmar, and I loved those books when I was a kid. That's when I read, everything, right, voraciously as a teenager.
Yeah. Years
later, I find out that Fritz Leiber is he is my first cousin twice removed. If I get this right,
that's awesome.
I think his sister is my great grandfather's. No, his mother is my great grandfather's sister, or something like that.
So
he was always in the Chicago area. That's where he did all his writing, and I'm from Illinois.
Oh, wow.
And my brother found this out. My genealogically interested brother found this out and told me about it. And I'm like, how cool.
Now, since we're here tonight to talk about Dark Sun, we have to bring up Dragon Kings.
Dragon Kings, right.
Which is your Kickstarter that you launched.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I was encouraged many times over the years that after I got away from TSR to pick up the license or the property of Dark Sun and revitalize it. And on 3 separate occasions, 2 of which were especially well-backed and well-funded and well-organized. But in all 3 instances, they turned us down flat. They just would not give up in any way, shape, or form, even a license to do Dark Sun materials later. So I know that Troy Denning, the co-designer on the project, he always wanted to do more in a Dark Sun-like environment. Brahm, as an artist, he can kind of reach into that area all the time. And I had my own ideas about, I'd like to do more game design in an environment much like Dark Sun. And since we couldn't get Dark Sun, all of us were kind of interested in creating something like it. Okay, if we can't have Dark Sun back, what would you create if it was something sort of its spiritual successor, if you will? So, and in the age of Kickstarter, I was encouraged, hey, why don't you go out there and see if there's a fan base that wants to support something like that. So I did. I got together. I got Brahm involved on the cover art for the project, and Tom Baxa, one of the original artists that we worked with at TSR, and said, hey, I want to create this new thing called Dragon Kings, which is thematically similar, but it's going to be its whole new deal. Do you guys want to get involved? And And they both said yes, and the rest is relatively recent history.
Yeah, you achieved your goal at 29,000. You hit 41,000, which is great.
Right.
Now it's been 2 years since this project was funded.
No, it's one.
Oh, well, okay, yeah, just 1 year. I'm sorry, you're right. It's 2013, not 2012.
Wait,
I'm not.
How old am I?
No, you're right. So 1 year ago, this project was funded 1 year ago.
Right.
A little over. And how far have you guys come on fulfillment? Are you pretty close to getting all the stuff out?
Yeah, we're there. The books are, everything that needs to be printed is off and could in fact be on a boat, since we're printing that overseas right now. And I'm going to have it just after the first of the year to ship out to everybody. So we're in very, very good shape.
So you're closing in on complete and total fulfillment. That is awesome.
Yeah, how about? Yeah.
All right.
These projects are so large, and stuff gets away from you. But yeah, I'm really proud of the way the book turned out. All of the art and the layout and the writing and everything is really, really terrific.
All right, I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
Are you an elf?
I don't think so.
You're not a psionic desert running elf.
Well, I do dig the desert. Now that I live out here, I think it's pretty cool. But
It's amazing, isn't it?
I haven't done any real elfish kind of activity, so I'll have to say no.
All right.
Okay. So my character sheet still says human on it someplace.
All right. Well, after the character sheet, we're going to talk about what we've been playing lately.
Okay.
And I want to start with Daryl. Daryl, tell us, what have you been playing lately?
I'm still playing in my Pathfinder game that's run by my high school friend. First game he's run in a long time. It's an urban-based rogues campaign, and our first adventure last week was a dungeon crawl where we killed a bunch of creepy crawlies. And this week, Thursday, we had a little bit of a better experience in terms of in theme, in that it was very Shadowrun-esque. We were given half a plan by a member of the Thieves Guild to break into this high society party, secret these 5 packages somewhere in the room. We have to stab them with a dagger, and then something happens, and we have to lock all the doors and get out. Wow. And we, in true Shadowrun fashion, screwed it all up and got out by the skin of our teeth, to the point where my friend Will's character, he actually had to wear a dress and play my wife at the con.
Nice.
And so he had like this big like Kaylee type ball gown with the big hoop skirt, and so we hid all the packages under there, and we had to get the 5th one, and it's like, and the captain of the guard was one of the people we had to lock inside. We got all the doors, we secreted all the packages around, we had stabbed them all, we had a minute to get out before whatever happened was gonna happen, and we're running out, and it's like, okay, the plan was to just drop the bag and stab it on the way out, but instead, he was panicking, so, my friend Kim, he pulled out his dagger, and instead of trying to do it properly, take it out and stab it, he stabbed him in the dress as we're running out of the building. I don't see this because I'm in front. And then the captain of the guard just sees this half-orc pull out a dagger and stab her right in the stomach. And yeah, that was kind of the tip-off that something was going wrong. But we got out and the things went off, so we did escape, barely. But now our faces are known, so con jobs are going to be difficult till I get man's in disguise kit. And there are, somewhere in Will's house, there are 2 D20s that I chucked across the room in frustration.
Well, it's always a good game when some character is cross-dressing. I at least that's been my experience. Brandon, what have you been playing lately?
A whole lot of Shadowrun.
I bet you have.
A whole lot of it. I currently hold the record for most games GM'd on that Runner Hub. So
nice.
Yeah, I've been exercising my on the fly muscles.
You're a GMing machine, sir.
Apparently. But also, I've been playing a lot of video games, unsurprisingly, and the most recent one being Dragon Age Inquisition. I have also been dabbling in Fate system game.
What?
That is, yeah. It's me and another guy that I know online that are currently trying to basically use this Fate system to create something like a sci-fi type game underground. We're trying our best to throw it together, and we're just messing with the mechanics and seeing what we can do. It's rather interesting. So a homebrew type game system, I guess you could put on there. Yeah. that's been a lot of fun.
All right. Mr. Brown, what have you been playing lately?
For the most part, locally, what I get involved with is a certain amount of miniatures games. I'm still a big miniatures gamer, which is, harkens back to the distant past of my gaming roots. But, I love historicals and been doing some World in Flames, and we do some 40K as well.
Whoops! What's your army?
I don't have out here. I don't have an army, so I play with whatever anybody's brought. So, ever since I moved here, I've got some Marines back in my house in Wisconsin that someday I'll have to get planted back out here. All right. Along with my historical stuff, all my Civil War stuff is back there too. So,
all right,
that's always good. Role playing wise, the last real serious role playing stuff I did was an online game with some friends, mostly out of Chicago area, where we were doing kind of a homegrown system for a fairly historical Vikings game.
Ooh.
Which in its last incarnation took a really bizarre turn where we were kind of, not only were we doing all this great Viking stuff around Iceland and the north coast of France and all this other stuff where we're involved in all manner of bizarre plunder and whatnot. We get sort of Loki'd into a situation where we're transported into the future, and suddenly we are all sailors at the Battle of Trafalgar.
Wow.
All things. Yeah, I know. It's really yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And then have to thwart the bad guys who have accompanied us there in those terms, and then find our way back. So it was pretty wild stuff.
England expects every Viking to do his duty.
I know, it's fun. Yeah, really crazy stuff, but
that's brilliant.
Yeah, fun stuff. And then Lord knows a ton of computer games and everything else that comes across. And when you're in the industry and you end up playtesting a lot of your own stuff too. So
absolutely,
as ramping up for a project with a computer game company, I end up playing that game a whole lot.
Yes, you do.
Yeah,
yes, you do. And by the time it releases, you're sick of it and done.
Right. And I can't even remember it by its release name because I only knew it under its prototype name, so I don't even know where it is. So it's fun. Obviously, being able to play games all the time is a tremendous way to.
It's a great job, isn't it?
Yeah.
What have you been playing lately, Ross? Well, I'm glad you asked.
Well, Ross, what have you been playing?
I have been actually. The holidays are really tough on scheduling for role playing games. Really, really, really tough. So actually, there hasn't been any real role playing for me since the last show we recorded. But I have gotten to play Spartacus, the board game, which is brilliant. I highly recommend it to anybody who is a role player because you cannot play this board game without role playing. In fact,
so you're still into that one? It hasn't gotten
no.
old for you yet?
In fact, we were playing it over at a friend's house, and Sean Fannin was with me, and he was actually sitting out because it's only a 4-player game, and he was just running the market for us, and he was role playing. Right? I mean, that's what makes Spartacus such a great game.
Nice.
In addition, I did some more writing for Warhammer 40K Regicide, which I'm really, really excited about. Can't wait to hear this dialogue that I've been scripting for these guys. It's going to be amazing, which is a video game I'm working on. And I did some play of Batman Arkham Origins on my Xbox, which is a pretty fun little game. And that's pretty much it. The holidays it's going to be probably at least another week before I get to play another role-playing game because of all the...
Wow.
Well, you know how it is. You get guys, families, and Christmas, New Year's, and it's very difficult. At least I've always found it difficult to get a game going in December.
Busy times.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to shift over to what we call our Tavern Tales, and this is where we ask our guests to give us a memorable die roll. I'm going to start with Brandon, so you can kind of get an idea of what it's like, Tim.
Okay.
So, Brandon, can you give us a story of a memorable die roll?
Oh, I have many, many, many of them. Let's go with one that actually happened rather recently. So this is in Shadowrun. So the job was to...
Of course it's in Shadowrun.
Of course, given my recent history. But the job began with the team having to grab some data from a House of Ill Repute. So after they get this data, they find out that their target is going to be a low-level executive for a mega corporation. Some things happen, and they decide that the face is going to social infiltrate their way into an arcology, because that is always the best way to do things. They go in, set off all sorts of alarms, and get all sorts of eyes on them without even noticing, because he failed every perception roll. So So he fails every perception while just walking by like, it's okay, I got this. I'm the face. I have like 1 million face dice.
Oh, Lord.
And
Uh-oh.
so the head of security for this building knows exactly what's going on and is watching every move he makes. And the executive decides, hey, I will let him in because this should be amusing. He fails his first social die roll of the game.
Oh, no.
Critically glitching.
Deprotagonized.
Yes. And so the face, after this critical glitch, I asked him twice if he wanted to spend edge to make that not happen. He said, no, let's go with it. Oh, well, okay then.
Wow.
This story's starting to sound very familiar, like my D&D game on Thursday. Except I don't have edge to make my roll of 1 not happen on my first bluff check.
So he critically glitches, and the whole time I was stringing his character along as if, things are going fine. People are looking at you and smiling and nodding as if you belong here. And when he made that critical glitch, it was as if the music stopped.
Nice.
And then bad things happened, and now the character has a cranial bomb, and he has to deal with that. So, but yes, that is the most memorable die roll that I have had in recent memory, in the past couple days at least.
All right. Now, Tim, I'm going to ask you the same thing. Do you have a memorable die roll you can tell us about? And if possible, can it be a memorable die roll from a Dark Sun game?
Oh, my God. Well, most of the Dark Sun games I ever played, I was actually running it.
Okay, that's fine. It could be
particular roles there. When the topic came up just a few moments ago, it actually harkened back to a playtest we were doing in creating the 2300 AD universe at Game Designers Workshop. So the basic background here is that it's a relatively near future Earth environment where mankind has stretched out, no more than 30, 40, 50 light years away from Earth at this point to various planets. And there's really only one sort of aggressive warlike alien race that gets encountered, and they're called the Kafirs.
Right.
And they're kind of like a half cockroach humanoid kind of warlike race. And we were playing, kind of an invasion scenario as these things are coming through. And we're out at Beta Canum Venaticorum, which is an actual star system, and the game postulates that there's an inhabited human world there that actually has its own beanstalk, which is a space elevator all the way to what geosynchronous or geostationary orbit. I can never remember. At any rate, the Kafirs decide to invade, and we're the human players, and we've got a very limited number of very small colonial spacecraft to fight them off with, and these great big Kafir battleships are coming in. And to play this whole thing out, we actually drug out Star Cruiser, which was the board game where you could play out ship combat in that environment.
Nice.
And I remember we put our little ships out there, and we knew that our tiny ships really couldn't do anything to these Kafir battleships that were coming at us. They were just too large, and we couldn't do much to them. But I actually ran this little colonial fighter craft up against one, and in a very Star Wars kind of way, managed to eke out one little hit on it. And when we rolled that hit to see what the actual damage was, it came up as the continuing damage result in the game.
Woot, critical hit.
Yeah, which basically meant every round you would roll again for something else to go wrong on this big Kafir ship. So as I'm flying away, it just keeps damaging itself. And I think Frank Chadwick was actually rolling for the Kafir ships and rolled again another continuous damage, and again, nice. And I believe even a fourth time, until that whole ship was just wrecked internally from this one little rubber band, slingshot hit from this tiny little ineffective,
nice,
colonial battler, a fighter ship of mine, which I thought, well, that just seems very, very fun and role playing like, and it's so miraculous that happened, but. As far as particular, what's a critical die roll kind of environment? That's the one that came to mind.
That's badass. That's a great story. Fun. Okay, let's jump into our main topic, which is talking about Dark Sun.
Sure.
First, let's get into the history. How did Dark Sun came about?
Okay. Well, as I said earlier, I came to TSR from Game Designers Workshop in 1989, just as a base level designer, and I got there and got assigned to some fairly basic role playing books that needed to be, written up or finished off, those kinds of things. And at that time, the second edition of the AD&D game was out, and there were 3 different universes created for it. They already had the world of Greyhawk, and they had the Forgotten Realms, and they had Dragonlance.
Right.
All 3 of them were what were known as second edition, AD&D worlds. Those were the 3 worlds that went along with the second edition game. So those
Spelljammer was coming out around that time.
Yeah,
right?
It was a little later. Yeah, but that and Ravenloft were about to happen, but they weren't really on the scene just yet. Or if they were, it was like one module that sort of suggested we were going to go in that direction. So in those days, TSR was a pretty big professional company with executives and department heads and all this other stuff, and it certainly had ambitions to become a bigger company as time went on in the mass market and everything. So at any rate, we had this very large marketing department, and some of the marketing people were game savvy, and some of them just weren't. But they made an evaluation. I think it was 1990, so I wasn't there very long. They had decided that one of those 3 game universes was just about to die. It was going to disappear forever, and we needed to come up with something to replace it. And the one they said that was going to die and disappear forever was Dragonlance. They thought, any day now, people are just going to stop buying Dragonlance for some reason. They must have had some chart someplace that said that sales were indicated. Of course, that was absolutely wrong. Dragonlance went on for years and years and years after that. But they said...
Well, the Designers and Dragons history book, the 80s edition, very strongly suggests that Dragonlance essentially saved TSR after all the money spent suing GDW.
Well, that's possible. I can't say that's not true, though. In the last years that I was there, most of the money that TSR was bringing in was actually from as far as I knew, was from the Spellfire card game and some of the big, heavier, more successful books in the second edition line, like the Monstrous Compendium and whatnot, things like that just sold just gonzo volume of books that came out.
Right.
But at any rate, yeah. For whatever reason, they had decided in 1990 that Dragonlance was about to go belly up. And we need another world. We need to create the world that's going to replace that. So they came to the design department and essentially gave the blessing. Create a new D&D second edition, AD&D second edition game universe. Just go. And I was shocked that of all the design staff that this was just laid out there, that none of the known big designers really stepped up and said, "Hey, I want to do this." So I mean, and for whatever reason, Jeff Grubb didn't put his hand up, and Zeb Cook didn't put his hand up, and it kind of languished there. So in the back of the room, up comes my hand, and I said, "Well, I'd like to be involved in creating whatever this is going to be." And Troy Denning was also relatively new back to TSR at that time. He had worked for it years before, but it had a hiatus, and had come back to work at TSR. And he and I were basically, tasked with, okay, well, let's get a team together and create some ideas and throw something together and see what we can come up with.
I have a quick question for you here.
Of course, go ahead.
From what I've read on Wikipedia and from some of the little bit of the Designers and Dragons, it's discussed that, and you could totally tell us we're wrong, but this is just something I'm curious about. It's discussed that Dark Sun partially came about because of a push for a new miniatures game, an expansion of battle system.
Mm-hmm.
It's the War World.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, okay. So here you go. So as we start talking about what to do, we're also part of a larger company making a lot of different products, and there were 2 other big products that were being created sort of simultaneously. And so we thought that our new universe should embrace both of them. And one was the new psionics book, reintroducing psionics into the AD&D game that was being worked on. And, as you just pointed out, the new edition of the battle system miniatures game was also in the works. I know Doug Niles was working on that design, and the guys at Raw Partho were already creating big miniatures lines that were going to go with it and all of this stuff. So we decided...
Were they still... was Raw Partho still independent at that time, or were they owned by FASA yet?
I think they were independent at that time, but they got bought by FASA a little later. But you could check me on that. I
Okay.
might be wrong on that, to be honest with you.
I was just curious.
So this push to make it link up with the miniatures game, did that have an impact on the design of the world? Because Dark Sun looks nothing like any of the other settings. It's so distinct and so unique. Was that to make the miniatures? Was partially that to make the miniatures look very unique?
We certainly had an ambition that any miniatures we could make. I should say that differently. We had every expectation that anything we created, miniatures would be made for it. So we might as well make everything pretty exotic looking.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, that's awesome.
So we had we really didn't get any direction from anybody that said we really had to include a big battle system element or had to include a big psionics element. But it just seemed like those would be cool things to really ramp up in whatever it is we were about to create. So armed with that, we started having a few just generalized production meetings where we would invite in various designers from around the company and just start spitballing different ideas. And very quickly, a couple of things emerged. First that like I said, we would like to do something that really embraces a lot of mass combat as battle system game would allow us to do. And second, we already had 3 very Tolkien-esque fantasy worlds for Dungeons and Dragons.
Right, Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms, and Greyhawk.
Right, all of them, and we should do something different. And I certainly was a big proponent that we had in many ways, I wouldn't say exhausted. We had definitely gone down the road of a Tolkien-like European style fantasy universe enough times that maybe we should invest a little more
Gone to
thought.
that well one too many times.
Yeah, I kind of felt that way. I mean, that was my impression when I got there. As I tried to ramp up quickly on all of those worlds as a young designer, I found it hard to keep them separated in my head, to be honest with you. But
that's fair.
But yeah, my own particular bent on fantasy literature was always more towards the pulp authors. Was like the Conan and John Carter and even Fritz Leiber's stuff, which was a little more, a lot grittier, a lot more human centric for the most part. And just a whole different flavor about, the sense of adventure and survival. Not everything being so sweeping that it's all boils down to what Sauron is up to, but a little more earthy, and every adventure can have its own unique little flavor as the characters go on from one thing to the next. So, combining all of those ideas together, we started churning things about and created a working title for something called War World, which would be the earliest foundations of what we would eventually bring into being as Dark Sun.
Now, when did the artwork get involved? Because the look is so distinct on Dark Sun. I think the writing definitely makes it a different world, but the artwork just transports you there.
Yeah, absolutely. We were very fortunate. Again, talk about ideas and people all coinciding at the right place and right time, and I feel that was very much happening when we got to work on Dark Sun. We had a lot of great artists working at TSR already, and a lot of the famous guys. Clyde Caldwell was already there, and Larry Elmore was already there. But they had some junior guys, too, and one of the junior guys on staff was a guy named Brahm, who had been hired on. He was a staff artist. He had not been there very long. He probably started about the same time I did, or maybe a little bit before. Had done a few covers, and he had such this distinctive style. We immediately recognized that he'd be a guy that could create some really exotic kinds of things, because we were already starting to think about ramping up bug armies and all this weird stuff. We were, just pie in the sky. Even entirely new races. At first, we were going to dispense with all of the races except human and just come up with totally new stuff. And we thought, well, we need somebody with a really unique feel. And we felt like we wanted to have a unified look for the for the trade dress of the line and how the paintings all looked for the covers and the interior art presentation and all of that, which up to that point at TSR had been, hadn't really been solidified. The other lines, looked good, don't get me wrong, but creating a real distinctive feel for how the whole thing looked as well as read and felt was something we wanted to do. We asked if we could work with Brahm as a primary artist on the whole thing. He was certainly receptive to the idea.
If I may really quick, just jump in here.
Sure.
This was 1990, right?
I think so. Yeah, that's right.
So in this period of time, most role-playing products were fairly piecemeal in terms of trade dress and branding and things like that.
They were.
It wasn't until things like Dark Sun and especially Vampire the Masquerade when they really started to build up this idea that every book should look like it's part of the same line and everything should have the same visual style.
Right. And I'll take my fair share of credit on that. I thought that was a logical way to go, but I'm not the artist and I wasn't doing the layout. But that was, we wanted a unified family look to our product line.
You definitely succeeded. I don't think there's I don't think there's any setting from second edition that you can identify from one look as quickly as Dark Sun.
Yeah, I got to give credit that part of it is just the uniqueness of the setting.
Right.
That you're going to have paintings of whole different things as opposed to, another wizard fighting in a dungeon. Not to put that down, but we wanted something, we really wanted to turn everything on its ear because we hadn't been told that we couldn't turn everything on its ear.
Now, Daryl has this strange rumor that he told me about.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a rumor I read online when I was doing the research for the show, and I wanted to go to one of the people who was actually there because it's an internet rumor. But one of the things that was said that originally Dark Sun was going to be a frozen wasteland instead of a desert wasteland, but one of the reasons was art related in that it would preclude any art that had heavy, what we now call fan service. Is there any truth to that at all?
I can't really confirm or deny. There were so many iterations early on of what would be the core themes of the setting that there probably was a frozen world suggested at some point. And why we didn't go with it, I'm not sure I could definitely pin down to an art-based reason why we didn't do that. My own reaction to that, my present day reaction to that is I would have guessed we'd have gotten rid of it just because it would have been too many white covers. And you can only do so much with snow, and who wants to be cold all the time? And even Conan leaves the frozen north to go where it's warm and adventurous.
Fafhrd does the same thing.
Right. It's a good place.
Jon Snow never learned the lesson.
Yeah, true enough.
Well, let's be very clear here. I personally am a big fan of Dark Sun. I always thought it was a really, really cool, very unique setting. I didn't play a whole lot of campaigns set there, but I always looked at it and said that right there is a very creative, unusual, unique, distinct world. Daryl, did you ever play a lot of Dark Sun?
I didn't, but it's probably because when I was a kid, it had this same vibe to it that I can't put my finger on why, and I don't know the timeline, what came out first, but I never liked Dune.
Oh, okay.
And Dark Sun had a Dune vibe to the artwork. And again, I don't know if Dune came first or after.
Oh, Dune came way first.
Actually, probably I would have been first because the movie came out way before.
Yeah, the movie
it came out in the early 80s.
The novels are from the 50s and 60s for the most part, right? And the most famous Dune movie was early 80s, right?
Yeah.
I think it was 83.
Okay, sounds right. Sounds right.
All right, so Daryl didn't play very much of it either. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't play much of it until we got into 4th edition.
Oh, sure.
I loved it in 4th edition. It fit the tone and style of the game. If you had a good GM who was able to really bring those sort of survival, dystopian, post-apocalyptic elements.
What about you, Brandon? What's your opinion of Dark Sun?
My opinion of Dark Sun is that I unfortunately was never able to play it. I have heard of it. I have talked to many people about it. I've heard wonderful stories about the setting. I've just never experienced it firsthand, unfortunately. And it's after doing a bit of research on it and listening to everything that we've talked about it so far, this is a fantasy setting I would love to be a part of. if I could ever find a group to play it with.
There you go.
What is the most important invention in all of mankind? Beer! Longtime listeners will know how much I love good alcohol, but when it comes to craft beers, there's so much out there it can be intimidating. What's the difference between a brown ale and an IPA? And why is there so much German, Hefeweizen, Bock, Dunkel? Where do you start? I'll tell you where. Craft Beer Club. For just $3 each, you'll get 3 bottles of 4 different beers right to your door every single month from independent craft brewers of the best quality. In just a short amount of time, you'll be snobbing up with the hipsters talking about nose and hops. But Daryl, I can get a 12-pack cheaper at the local store, you say. But can you get specialty regional small batch beers at that price with this much selection? I didn't think so. Besides, you know you'd spend twice that much at a bar for the same beers just to try them out. So go to gamerstavern.org/craftbeerclub and we'll start you out with your first shipment plus 3 free gifts. That's gamerstavern.org/craftbeerclub and start enjoying real beer.
We're back with guest Timothy Brown. We're talking about Dark Sun. Tim, thanks again for being on the show with us because...
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Can you tell us, what is Dark Sun?
Dark Sun is a fantasy games universe that emphasizes a few key things that have always spoken to me as a reader of fantasy and as a gamer of fantasy. It is a place where the environment itself is one of the adversaries you are consistently up against. It is an environment where you personally can rise and fall in your personal fortunes radically, from very rich to very poor and unimportant, and very quickly over a short period of time. And I think the combination of those two things in a fantasy, highly magical sort of environment creates a really rich place to create adventures and things to do and a lot of fun to be had.
Okay, and so the themes, you talked about the themes of Dark Sun. What are those main themes?
I think the theme specifically to Dark Sun, obviously you start with the desert setting. Here's a world that is stressed, and the chief reason that world is stressed is because the application of magic in that particular universe actually has a destructive effect upon the natural ecosystem in the immediate environment of the spellcaster.
Defilement.
Right. You're using defiling magic. It basically sucks the life energy out of things around you to power that magical spell. So a decision must be made. Do you want to do it? Is it worth casting the magic in the first place? And obviously years and generations and all this magic that's been thrown about has had a terrible effect upon the environment, such that the entire region of Athos is a very inhospitable place to be.
And the world is called Athos.
Yeah, the world of Athos, right. So that environment, I think, is just key. And again, from the literary background that we tried to draw upon, it's key in a lot of that literature. It's survival on Dune is key. It's something that's ever present. You cannot forever get away from it if you want to live and work on Dune. Then you have to pay attention to that. So
harsh environment is a big theme for Dark Sun.
Yeah, traveling between cities and something like Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms, it's just, hey, let's put a character in together so the orc raiders don't get us. In Athos, it's, okay, we have to bring a epic crapload of water or we're all going to die. It's like the Oregon Trail on crack.
Yeah, so there's more consideration to your average, just getting around, your average survival on a given day, and it creates a tougher breed of adventurer, that sort of thing. Now,
the tone of Dark Sun is darker too, right?
Yeah, most definitely. It is a treacherous kind of place. Obviously, the Sorcerer Kings in their cities across that region of the world each had his or her own terrible tale of how they came to power and how they ruled their particular city-state. But in general, it's a place of treachery and skullduggery, and the nefarious backstabbing that's going on is another constant thing that you have to be vigilant.
Well, there's cannibalism
and gods.
Well, hang on. With tone specifically, I'm talking about cannibalism is a core part of the game.
Yeah.
Slavery is a core part of the game. These things happen all the time.
Right.
Gladiatorial combat and not in the fun way.
Sports.
Yeah. The original storyline that we started meeting out for the original lead character that became Rikus was that he is a gladiator. That gladiatorial combat and slave ownership are, of course, pervasive all across the planet, and that there's actually impetus for a Spartacus-style revolt against that kind of oppression.
I am Rikus.
That's right. I am Rikus. Hey,
and that was Tyr, right?
We should make a movie.
Or a Stars television show. So yeah, they're all saying there's no gods.
Yeah, we made again, part of the rampant let's change everything, of which I was very, very guilty, was, well, let's, do we need to have an environment that has a pantheon of gods? And we kind of decided that there's really there's no compelling reason we have to do that. We can change the character classes around in such a way that it's not completely necessary. And we created the Templars in such a way that they don't have specific gods that they're worshiping, which again takes the entire AD&D game system and takes whole chapters out that you don't even need anymore, right? So we were self-radicalized when it came to changing things around. And
now there's no gods, but everybody is psionic.
Yeah,
wild talents.
It's a matter of degree. So we felt like again it was a unique and fun system, and it gave every character, not just the traditional spellcasting character classes in other AD&D second edition games, but it really gave every character an ability to infect the environment in sort of a mock magical kind of way. And what would that do, right? What does that do to your entire environment? What does being metal poor do to your entire environment? What all of these questions. It's like take them all. And how does that change the basic AD&D universe? Now, One rumor I will squash. I remember this rumor from way back when. We put it all out, and we had an idea, that we wanted the various city-states across this thing. So actually, Troy was the first guy to actually draw up. He took a piece of the map paper and drew out the very first pencil sketch of what would become the map of this Colorado-sized portion of the world. Okay, so not a very big portion of the world. Anyway, he drew that all out, and that became the map the basis for which became the really nice painted map that eventually came out as the poster. The game had hardly been out, and people were saying, "Ha, we were right. This is the Forgotten Realms in the future." And it's like,
oh.
We never thought of it as the Forgotten Realms in the future. Absolutely not. But there were people who insisted on various, this is, it's the early 90s, so there were very few websites, very few chats going on in those days. But there was a consistent, paranoid fantasy out there that we had, this is the Forgotten Realms in the future. And people were even saying you could take that map of Athos and put it down over a Forgotten Realms map in such a way, and all these different cities lined up, or some crazy stuff like that.
Wow.
Yeah, because the original history, the backstory was something about like the entire world's races started with halflings who were bioengineering a fungus or something.
Right.
Wow.
We thought we could create a fairly science fiction sounding backstory to the whole thing, that ultimately there was a time and a place where the world was a lot more common in an AD&D setting type, if that's common, right? And there was dabbling in various magic or dabbling in various pseudoscience that actually led to a changing of the universe in such a way that it probably did such things as unleash psionics, for instance, and change the color of the sun, and did all of these things that
because it was a blue sun that was changed to a yellow sun
like that.
because they found defiling magic, and that kind of blew everything up, and then like the brown fungus was kind of taking over the planet and sucking up the water. That was the original story.
Well,
in second
I'm sure
edition,
the
right?
Superman figure's in there somewhere too, right? The yellow sun. He's like, I need that power, man.
Precisely. That's a part of the story, though, that we didn't mind people chatting about. We didn't mind it changing from telling to telling or addition to addition to sort of.
Because I got retconned in 4th edition, didn't it?
Yeah, I think they just changed it.
Yeah, they retconned everything where it was like guy whose name starts with an R and has a TH in it. Crap. The first
Right.
Defiler. Sorry, the
Look what
name's
you did to
escaping,
me.
but he sorry, my fault. But basically they changed the history so that instead of that, it's he found magic, and magic just happened to suck the life out of everything. And when he was on his War of Conquest, he kept sucking up more and more and more, and other people started learning it, and then desert.
Right. Okay. I'm not as familiar with that stuff. It's way after my time, of course, but
Yeah, that was fourth edition was designed by former guest and friend of the show Robert Schwab, and Bruce Cordell had a hand in that as well.
Let's be very, very clear.
So-
I think Robert Schwab and Bruce Cordell are great guys. I love the things that they've done, but this is also the same edition of Dark Sun that introduced an adventure where you found like a crown and a river, which are
What?
two things you should never ever find in a Dark Sun adventure. Like,
Well, there's a whole 5 rivers.
no.
in the entire
This was
planet,
like just
I
like
think.
it was just like a river at the bottom of a dungeon. It had completely nothing to do with anything. And if this was actually a Dark Sun adventure, the whole reason to go in the dungeon would be to find the freaking river.
So was that one of the? So was that one of the encounters?
I believe it was a
because they had an
free
entire season of
RPG day
encounters.
adventure.
Oh, okay.
And
that
it was
one.
was fairly, again, no hate on this podcast. So I was just very disappointed to find out that it kind of bucked the trend, if you will, of Dark Sun
Yeah.
by saying, "Oh, hey, here's
Yeah.
this big pile of gold and magic items and a freaking river." It was pretty roundly dismissed online as a not very Dark Sun like adventure.
It's one of those things where, Troy and I have talked about this several times over the years, that just the circumstances of both of our careers kind of took us away from Dark Sun fairly quickly after it was designed and put out on the market. So it wasn't too long after that he was no longer involved with the game design because he was doing a whole lot more novel writing. And I was not a whole lot involved in the day-to-day design because I was doing a whole lot more management sorts of things. So other people come in, and as new people start, sharing your universe and doing their own things with it, you can always take a look and say, well, I'm not sure that's what I would have done. But
I've got 3 words for that
Yeah.
one. The Last Sea. 2 more words. Oh crap, I can't remember what they're called. Crap, what are the Mind guys called? I have it in the notes. Mind Lords.
right. Well,
Yeah, that was that's a source book that came out for Dark Sun a little bit later in its 2nd edition era, where they talked about the last sea that's left on the
Sure.
planet, and there's a city there that's ruled by these people called the Mind Lords. They're about 9,000 years old, and they all have dementia at this point, and it is enforced Happyville. Everyone has to think happy thoughts all the time, or these psionics are going to pick it up, and then they're going to basically mind wipe you and make you happy if you're not happy.
well, there are some.
At least
Yeah.
that's my impression. Again, that's my impression from reading some of the stuff read online. I haven't read that actual.
Okay, I don't want to dwell on this,
so-
but I did find the name of the adventure I was thinking of. It's called Marauders of the Dune Sea.
Oh, okay.
It is by Bruce Cordell.
Oh, that one.
Okay.
Again, Bruce, we love you. Just FYI,
Yeah.
we think you're great.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
but there is
I'm
a
not gonna-
15-foot deep pool of water in this dungeon.
Woohoo!
So that's
We're
a little.
rich.
That's pretty not Dark Sun. I just want to throw that out there.
Well, there
Kind of a big deal.
yeah.
there, just from a game designer's point of view, there are certain game universes that get created that lend themselves very well to being a shared universe, that you can put almost anything in it and it kind of fits. The Forgotten Realms, for instance. I think you can almost put anything into the Forgotten Realms someplace. But the more restrictive the theme of the universe, the harder it is sometimes to fit new stuff and new ideas into it without the seams kind of showing.
Right.
That brings up something that I thought was always one of the coolest things about Dark Sun is because it's such a brutal place. And this was unheard of in 2nd edition. You start off at 3rd level. Everyone is a
Right.
3rd level character because even the guy you're buying your provisions from is basically a 3rd level fighter.
Right.
Because no one else can survive.
Yeah, we talked about that rather extensively up front, whether that would be a good thing. Certainly, there were marketing reasons to do something like that, to sort of sell the thing as this is a super dangerous place, almost a dare, right? Do you dare adventure in this place? It's kind of silly when you think about it, but this was still the 2nd edition game. which I think predates the damage creep, if you will.
Right.
This is still back in the day when, your basic first level character could deal out, 1 to 8 points of damage every time he did an attack, and that was about it. As opposed to later editions of the game where if you got all the right things lined up, you can do 40 points of damage.
As a second level character.
Well, this is why Dark Sun started you at 3rd level, right?
Right. In those days, we didn't have any other, specific means to fortify you, and thought that not only for purposes of damage you might receive because it's a harsh environment, but also to ramp up the interest level for initial characters with having more spells to cast and things like that. It just seemed like a neat thing to do, and it was well received.
Well, here's a couple of things that are interesting. I want to point this out. Literacy is actually against the law in Dark Sun.
All right.
Huh?
It is outlawed for you to be able to know how to read, which is a big deal. And then you have 2 of your starting races, which is the elves who run marathons and are raiders in the desert, and the Thri-kreen, which are your humanoid mantis guys. They are actually
with 4 arms,
mortal freaking enemies, because the Thri-kreen eat elves.
Right.
So you could. This is a game where you could start out with your character already being a criminal just because he knows how to read, and your best friend is playing a character who likes to have you on a plate with a little, side of greens. I mean, it's. I love that it sets up this world that it really, like you say, everything's different. Well, that's a really good example of how everything is different right there.
Well, it reminds.
And the halflings.
Yeah,
the halflings.
Cannibals. Then you have half dwarves, which are called mules.
Right, a cross between a sterile cross between a human and a dwarf.
And then you've got half giants, which are a race.
Yeah, the half giants were introduced after my work on the game, but I thought they were a good fit. The half giants were really cool. That again, kind of
it was like an experiment of one of the Sorcerer Kings
that
created them.
Really fit, and it resonated with people. They enjoyed playing them. They enjoyed encountering them.
Now, I got a question. Who was it? You that decided to put the Thri-kreen in?
Yes.
Why? They're awesome, but why?
Well, honestly, I was so taken with the concept art for the Thri-kreen as it was being created for the Monster Manual edition that they first appeared in.
Yes, me too. I wondered if that was the case.
Yeah, that was it. Really, I just thought, man, that is so cool. And man, and we were already heading down the road of this being a desert kind of environment. And I thought, wow, these Thri-kreen could be great. And in fact, my original bent on the entire Dark Sun planet, here's a spoiler alert for something that never came to pass, was that essentially you've got this Colorado-sized map, and if you took the entire rest of the planet, it is basically Thri-kreen dominated. There's on the other side of the world is basically this gigantic Thri-kreen Roman Empire, if you will.
Wow.
And it dwarfs everything on this side of the world. That essentially Dark Sun would be a Thri-kreen and bug planet with a limited number of humans still hanging on in the region that we described.
The only good bug is a dead bug. I'm doing my part.
By the way, I did want to throw this out there. When you're talking about the maps, there is a awesome website I found when I was doing my research. It's at digitalwanderer.net/darksun. And it's kind of an interactive map of Athens where you can sit there and scroll around, and it's got every single settlement, every single city. And when you click on them, or even like geographical features like the Kano Swamp, you click on it and it gives you like information about that place.
Yeah, that's really terrific.
Like who's there. And it's really cool. It's kind of like Google Maps. You can click and drag around the map and zoom in, zoom out. It's really cool.
Only we had such power.
Let's talk a bit about Dark Sun from the standpoint of an adventurer, right? So you got to deal with the environment. You got to make sure you have water. You got to make sure you have food. You got to make sure you have some kind of weapon, usually made out of bone or stone.
Right, because it's a metal poor environment. And then that led to two things. First, just narrative interest, and second, that really opened up Brahm to make all kinds of really wacky stuff. And if I can for a moment, just to talk about the art interface a little bit. We also, I think we were very much on the cutting edge of the creative process between writing designers like Troy and myself and working with Brahm on the visual side. Pretty much up to that point, every product I'd ever been involved in, pretty much everything in role playing, the relationship was the writer would write down something and ask the artist to draw it. And it was a very one-way kind of communication. And if the artist drew it in the way that the designer liked, that was fine. If he didn't, the designer would tell the artist how he needed to change it. And we thought there's no reason that the writers should be so in charge of the visual aspect of the game. So we made it, a pact, if you will, with Brom up front. We want to describe stuff and have you draw it. But we also want you to draw all kinds of wacky stuff, and then we'll describe it. And a lot of great stuff came out of that. And we always wanted to give Brom more fodder for making weirder and weirder stuff. So if you create a universe where steel is often supplanted with bone or with pieces of bugs and all this other stuff, then it really gave him a lot of latitude to make some really interesting visual elements for the game.
It was a true collaboration.
I just always loved the idea of, like, your standard knight in shining armor isn't wearing shining steel armor. He's wearing bug skin.
Right.
Yeah, chitin. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, use what you've got.
All right, so I'm an adventurer in Dark Sun in Athos. I've got some psionics. I'm 3rd level. I'm pretty buff, but I have to worry about food and water, and I have just metal and bone weapons. But then if I step foot outside the city, like, everything wants to kill me.
Right.
No.
Right.
Right.
You need friends.
Right.
Sandworms.
Like what? Well, let's talk about the monsters, right? Because there were a lot of really interesting monsters out there in Dark Sun.
Yeah, well, that's another one where we really let the artists go fairly wild, and we would write up, you just draw the craziest, most dangerous looking thing you can, and of course they're always really dangerous looking. So,
well, yeah, they got spikes coming out of places that shouldn't be spikes.
Right.
Well, let's
That's how you know they're dangerous.
Tim, I want you to tell us about the dragons.
My favorite thing in my research was the dragons.
Well, for me, the dragons, the idea would be, again, this is a very powerful and dangerous environment, and as we started going through it, we thought, well, we should examine the dragons in terms of the fact that dragon form is something that is achieved, especially through the use of bizarre magic over a long period of time. When I worked on anything in the 2nd edition game, as a new designer especially, I'd always take a look at the list of spells, even up to and including those 9th level spells, and say, in the final analysis, almost all of the spells in this book are still mostly concerned with how do I, the wizard, kill the monster in front of me right now. And that's still what a lot of that magic was involved with. And again, from my literary background in fantasy, I thought, where's the game mechanics and the game terms for these more gigantic kinds of spells, the sort of stuff that Thoth Amon and Conan was cooking up, for 6 years and sacrificed 1,000 souls to make some gigantic magical effect. Things that took a long period of time, things that took a lot of effort, that took a lot of somatic, components and everything else. And all of those ideas kind of got married forward in that these are part of the transformative process where super high level magic users actually became dragons themselves, and that really resonated with a lot of people. Though it left me with a caution as a designer that I carry with me to this day, because we, at some point in the design process, we actually put the stats out there for the different Sorcerer Kings, right? At the very next convention I ever attended, some kid came up to us and said he loved that module. They killed every one of those guys and had very much changed the the setting from that point forward.
So which module was that? Was that the
which one has all the stats?
Was it the Valiant Dust and Fire?
Right? And
oh, by the way, that is generally considered to be the hardest module ever written for D&D, because 20th level. I'm not sure. I don't have it up right now, but basically, you can get your 20th level party can get wiped by a sandstorm.
Well, maybe it needed more playtesting
before you get to the city.
Right, but this is all back to how you become a dragon, right? Because dragons are not born; they're made. They're made.
That's right. And every one of them has their own unique and terrible backstory as they climb this ladder of destruction all the way to where they end up going. And they They are supposed to be evil, okay? With a capital E.
Now, just to give the listeners an idea of how badass these guys are, they're 20th level wizards who are also 20th level psionicists.
Right.
Step 1, to become a dragon, you have to become a 20th level wizard. Step 2, you then have to become a 20th level psionicist.
Right.
Step 3, you then have to go through 10 stages of transformation, which are represented by taking 10 levels of a class called Dragon. Step 4, you're a dragon that has 50 friggin' levels.
In second edition, that means incredibly awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know,
if I'm not mistaken, the reason why there's no gnomes, goblins, orcs, whatever, the story reason why is that basically you have to get a lot of XP and have to get a lot of stuff to become a dragon and get those levels. Right. And so basically the dragons in Athens have committed genocide to get to that point.
Yeah, I'd hate to, I don't think we ever ran the math on how many populations of monsters had to be wiped off the face of the planet to accommodate all these levels.
Now these guys, now here's the really, really, really bad news. These dragons that we're talking about, these incredibly evil, incredibly powerful dudes, they're the ones who rule the cities. You know, the safe places.
Right.
One of them. One.
Yeah.
There is one dragon in Athens that I'm aware of.
Well, the other is it the other cities run by dudes who are going through this process though?
Yeah, as I recall, they're all I think in the first
they're all on the way.
Yeah, they're on their way. Yeah. Every one of them, right?
This is what I'm saying. Is maybe now they're not there yet, but they're on their way to this, and they're the ones that are ruling the safe places to live.
Right.
That's what I love.
Well, it's all safe if you don't cross them.
Well, the cities are reasonably you're not going to get devoured by a horrible thing beneath the sand in a city, typically.
Right.
You're just going to be devoured by your Sorcerer King.
Well, let's talk about
sacrificed or caught up in a slave rebellion.
Let's talk about the classes, because we talked about the races and how they're different. Mm-hmm. How are the classes in Dark Sun different than your typical classes in D&D?
Well, we tried to change things around in such a way that it was mostly environment kind of backtracking upon the character classes. So we kind of thought, here's what our environment's going to be. Let's backtrack and say how that changes things. So, for instance, without gods, we changed the clerical thing around to be more like a Templar sort of thing. And with the magic having its terrible effect on the environment, we thought, well, okay, well, now we've got to take our spellcasters and divide them into those who don't care, the defilers, and those who do care, the preservers, and how do those things sort of interact and make things a bit more unique for them. So it was very much backtracking from the environment to, okay, how do we make the character classes basically fit with this?
And I really loved what you guys did with preservers versus defilers in terms of magic, and that defilers is quick, easy, powerful, but preservers, you have to actually put thought and effort into it, and it's never going to be as powerful as defiler's magic.
Yeah, it was.
But it's not going to wreck the environment. And then you've got the idea that basically everyone on Athos is, you use magic, you're not a Sorcerer King, witch, burn them! Yeah. Whether you're a preserver or a defiler. Yeah,
there's a certain amount of animosity. We just thought it would be a natural consequence of all that destructive magic, because everybody knows what it does, right? If you're going to cast a lot of spells around my subsistence farm, you're going to take it below subsistence level, so I've got to drive you away first. But, again, these are all consequences of a difficult environment that's got... we wanted to put those difficult choices in there. Whereas, just take the preserver defiler dichotomy there, that it's just a manifestation of the axiomatic. It's easier to destroy than to create, if you will.
Well, then you got clerics, and they instead of drawing their powers from the gods, because there are no gods, they're drawing the powers from the elements.
Right, elemental based magic, and this was a time too that I guess another little piece of AD&D history that maybe not everybody knows, but the first edition of the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons game, which was laid down almost exclusively by Gary in the different books, and he certainly had guidance over all of it, was rife with demons and devils, and he explored the planes in detail, and there were all the deities and demigods and all of those way old books that established all of this stuff. But when the company changed hands and they wanted to release the second edition of the game, they took certain things out. They took out the assassin character class, for instance.
This is the Satanic Panic.
Right. They took out the monk character class. And it's not so much a panic, but the company had changed hands and it was basically owned by people who thought that they would like to take it more mainstream, that someday they would like editions of Dungeons and Dragons that sold at Sears and Kmart and in every toy store in America, at least during Christmas, right? So they thought, well, let's just take that stuff out, and that included all the references to the planes and the demons and the devils. All that stuff disappeared from second edition, and then we designers, tried to reintroduce it in supplements rather than being part of the main game. So
again, there's really
assassins
fascinating.
come back and monks come back and all that other stuff.
There's a really fascinating chapter on all this stuff in the Designer's Dragons book on the 80s, because it goes into depth about the Satanic Panic and the reaction to it and things of that nature. So
right. I wasn't around for the super early days of that stuff. The kid in the steam tunnels and all that. I really don't know a whole lot about that personally, but there are guys who were there at that time that credit that sort of publicity. I can talk publicity, and say that, like it or not, that spurred a lot of publicity, and they sold a ton of games based on that.
Yeah,
that
there's
stuff alone.
Well, it's controversial because there's guys like Mike Stackpole that say it was bad for the industry, and then there's a lot of other people who are like, well, it definitely got everyone talking about the game, which means that everyone was buying the game. So
yeah, one way or another, Dungeons and Dragons has brand recognition worldwide almost as good as Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
Even if you've never played it, almost everyone's heard of it, and that harkens back to, a lot of things. The tonnage of product that's being sold in the pre-computer age when role-playing games were brand new in 1980, 81, 82, just mountainous amounts of material. I was told, again, that's before my time at TSR, but I was told that they were seriously considering at TSR buying their own paper mills and forest because they were printing so many books. There would be reasonable cost savings to them to just own it all.
Wow. Now getting back to the classes really quick. So we talked about the clerics. They have a elemental thing, set of gods. We talked about preservers and defilers. Now druids, they had to be bound to an oasis somewhere. Is that right?
That was the original thought, and I think that became a little more lax in later editions of the game. But we thought that with so little remaining nature out there to glom onto,
living nature.
Yeah, exactly, living nature. I mean, there's enough rock and sand and exposed, mountains, but any place where there's any, nurturing, living, life left to be is so isolated that we thought, okay, well, there was a lot of debate early on. Is there enough of that in our supposed environment to make the druid class even worthwhile? And there was certainly consideration to eliminate it. But we thought, okay, well, this is a world that where life is still clinging on, right? So we should have druids who are also clinging on to those last vestiges of life.
So druids were Klingons?
I didn't say that. Don't quote me. I'm going to get sued by Paramount.
God. Damn it, Ross. Seriously, I'm about to dial 911. I'm hurting so bad from that one, Ross. Come on.
And then there were some brand new classes too, right? Like fighters. There were fighters, but there were also gladiators.
Gladiators, right?
And there was Templars.
Yeah, and the Templars, we wanted to create kind of the badass cleric kind of halfway sort of thing, and the Templars were a clear way to create a fighter, sort of a militant class that could bridge over and be obvious henchmen for the evil Sorcerer Kings that are ruling all of the cities. So we thought this
is a really interesting point, though. These were also a core class for adventurers.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like you as the designer were telling players it's okay to have one of these servants of a really nasty evil dude who gets his power from a really nasty evil dude going with you on adventures.
Well, we weren't afraid of putting a lot of diverse people in the same adventuring group. So often, we would take a look at the fairly Tolkien-esque adventuring party, if you will, in that sort of fantasy. And in that sort of fantasy and adventure group, everybody's friends. Everybody has a common purpose. Whereas from the pulp setting, if you look at Conan Adventures, for instance, he's very often adventuring hand in hand with somebody he knows is on the opposite side of the fence. This is a potential enemy, but for the moment, we are friends of necessity.
Allies of convenience.
Right, exactly. And I think that leads to a lot more dynamic storytelling in the final analysis, though from a game master or dungeon master's point of view, sometimes that becomes more difficult. But we wanted to leave those doors open. We didn't want to dictate your party has to be all good characters or all evil characters or whatever. You could.
Good characters don't fare well in Athos, in my experience.
Yeah, well,
there's not to say that you can't be heroes.
Right. There's a lot of dark heroism going on. There's a lot of pick the lesser of several evils and pursue that.
So
shades of dark gray.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the world a little bit. We talked about the classes and the races.
Sure.
What are some of the distinguishing features, like some really important places on Athos?
We wanted to put, obviously the main setting is all of this arid landscape. And if you read the original edition, we tried to paint, and I credit Troy with most of this because he was a man from the West and had a much better idea of what real deserts were than I ever did. Though I live in one now, I didn't then. We tried very much to vary the quality of those different desert environments. And I wish we had more art to represent those. So, there was places that were clearly defined to be more like salt flats, and there were some that were more like boulder field kind of places, and some were, the typical Arabian type sand dune desert was very much in the minority. These are arid places, but with a lot of distinctive character that if they had been color books with a bigger art budget in those days, we'd have done a lot more. We would have given a lot more illustrative demonstration of what those were to be like.
So we got one of the landmarks, of course, are Uruk, right, which is the main city ruled by the dragon. Is that right?
Yeah, that's one of them.
And then there's the Sea of Silts.
The Sea of Silt is off to the east of this location, and it's got its own unique character that again gets explored mostly in later modules. But
what is the Sea of Silts?
Yeah, it is basically a place of how would I say, more of a seabed kind of a place that is actually filled with such a fine yet substantial sort of dust and whatnot that it can be sailed upon. You can move through it.
You can drown in it.
You can drown in it. But with a limited amount of magic, you can get through it and sort of walk to its very bottom and do all these different things. So,
well, on the plus side, there is about 3 to 4 meters down. There's a nice solid base you can walk across. Except for 3 to 4 meters is 9 to 12 feet.
Hey, you get a big straw.
Right. there was actually
if I'm not mistaken,
a bit of art. I'm sorry to cut you off, Daryl, but I got to get this out because this bit of art was awesome. It snapped or clicked in me what this setting was all about. There's a boat with some wheels and a sail going through the Sea of Silt, and behind it, and this is in full color, there's a giant that's mid-chest deep in the silt, just reaching, and you can tell he's about to just eat this thing alive.
If you're tall enough.
Yeah, and he's just clawing through it, and below it, it's Sea of Silt, where nothing wants you to live. And so in my research, that just clicked in me what this setting was all about.
So it's Australia.
Exactly. It is a bigger Australia.
No offense to our Australian
listeners, emails
but your country
at the Gamers Tavern.
Well, no, allow me to finish my. No offense to our Australian listeners, but your continent's kind of fucked up, dudes. Come on, everything's trying to kill you. Send your emails to abstruse@gamerstavern.org.
Everything is scary. But yeah, so sorry to cut you off, but that I just had to get that out because that really defined the setting for me.
That's a very
that was actually what I was about to bring up is riding giant back is one of the best ways to get across the Sea of Silt.
Now there's a free city too, right?
Tyr.
Right. Tyr's the free city. That's where the slave revolt begins. We wanted to have a place. I think it was probably done better in Planescape by creating the hub location of Sigil, which works very good for that setting. I think in the Dark Sun setting we had a good kernel of an idea to create the one place where everybody basically starts, where everybody can basically feel a bit neutral and comparatively safe in whatever it is that they're doing, and that was what we were trying to do with that particular city-state.
Now,
and we also.
I'm sorry,
go ahead.
Really quick. Isn't it true, though, that there are certain people that are not safe in Tyr, and those are pretty much Templars?
Yeah, I mean, the most evil of the evil, the Templars are, were kind of frowned upon, but we were always big on, if you basically, like in a Conan-type setting, you can go anywhere you want in pretty much ease and disguise if you're not displaying your raw talents at any given time. So you can get in and out of there.
Okay.
And Tyr is the only one of the city-states that slavery is illegal.
Yeah, that's after the slave,
because
right?
it became from a slave revolt. Basically, is what made it the free city of Tyr.
Successful revolt, and then you've got the Neva character and the Rikus character, and they're kind of running the show for a while.
I've always found slavery revolting,
as it should be. Well, we felt that would be,
Ouch.
I suppose the two primary things to rebel against in the original Dark Sun universe are, of course, the wanton destruction of the environment, and then the rampant abuse of slavery all over the place. And most people who wanted to be good characters or good gamers could line up against those factionally and work against them. And even if they did so in sort of the 50 Shades of Grey, if you will, you could feel good about that at the end of your adventuring session.
Let's not ever mention 50 Shades of Grey and slavery in the same sentence.
Okay, yeah, good point. We can edit that out, right?
Yes.
We'll fix it in post.
Yeah, fix that in post, please.
Put something in clever for me. Thank you.
I feel disgusting
I'm sorry,
just for hearing that.
the pun is still hurting me. So,
all right. Now, what about the gray? What is the gray?
I'm sorry?
The gray? Daryl, help me out here.
That was, and I don't know if this was originally in the book. That may be why Tim's kind of blanking out. But the gray was this barrier around Athos that prevented you from getting to the ethereal or the astral planes. And that's what cut off the access to the gods. And it's also one of the reasons why Dark Sun's also one of the most isolated of all of the D&D campaigns.
That's right.
I don't think we called it the Gray when we in the original design, so that's why I didn't recognize the name. But we were creating that new universe in a larger environment where we knew Spelljammer was coming along, and we knew that we were going to go back and visit the planes. So obviously the discussion was coming up for all of the game worlds. Well, can you get from one to the other through the planes and or Spelljammer? And we kind of decided that because Dark Sun was so unique and strange, especially for not having gods and things like that, and that magic worked totally different, that we wanted to limit that crossover. So kind of...
And it also kind of would have ruined Dark Sun if there was a chance to escape the planet, because the whole idea is it's a harsh environment. Everyone would want to jump on the Spelljammer ship and get out.
It would set up a means of escape. It would set up a means for these super powerful creatures of this universe to suddenly show up in other universes where there's nothing to counter them. And
50th level
exactly.
dragons.
And we thought all of that would be something we would hate to have to answer for in the future. So the best thing to do was to come up with reasons why you couldn't really get to them via the planes or get to them via a spelljamming vessel. So
it's a world so desolate that even Spelljammer and Planescape don't go there.
Right.
Well, there were, and this was during second edition's era where everything was crossing over with everything else.
Right.
Like Vecna was showing up in, and this was a little bit later, so it's probably after your time, but Vecna was showing up in Planescape and in Spelljammer and Ravenloft. And
once that genie was out of the bottle, there was no putting it back in. So it was all over the place.
But no, there were two crossovers that are canon during the TSR era. Number one, Callanday got pulled to Ravenloft for a while.
And who's Callanday?
That's one of the city
Okay.
states. I think Lich leads that one.
Yeah, I think so.
But number two, and this is my favorite one of them, was the Gith Yankee decided, hey, let's invade Dark Sun. And they landed. And they noped right the hell out of there so hard they put up a big sign that said, do not come back. Wait, no, screw this. We don't even need a sign. Close this portal behind us. Cement blocks When the Githyanki show up at your planet and say, yeah, this is way too hardcore for us.
That's crazy. Yeah.
When you get kicked out of the Ravenloft Club,
Yeah.
Right.
is when you know you're a bad place.
Now, there's also the Last Sea. What is the Last Sea?
The Last Sea is again a later invention, but we had alluded to it early that there has to be some place where there's still some freestanding water, right? So in that sense, we knew it was out there someplace, and then it got developed, I think, mainly as a fourth edition location. Isn't that correct?
Well, no, there was a second edition source book on it that for my readings on athos.org, which if you're interested in Dark Sun, definitely go to athos.org. It is the unofficial official website for Dark Sun at this point in time. Wizards of the Coast is kind of giving them their blessing as the official fan site.
Yeah, that's Bob Aducci's site, and he does a great job with that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great information on there, and that's one of the reasons why if I come up ignorant, it's because I didn't have time to read all the awesome stuff on that site.
Athos.org.
Yep. But looking on there, one of the things about the Lost Sea and the second edition book is a lot of people kind of push that to the side and stick it in the bottom drawer and try to forget it exists. Because again, like I was talking about, the Mind Lords and the Happytopia.
Who are the Mind Lords?
That place is. The Mind Lords, as I understand it, are these psionic beings that have existed for about 9,000 years. And because they're so old at this point in time, they've got dementia. And they're kind of a little bit loopy. And they want everyone to be happy. Wow. You're not happy, citizen. Let me psionically erase your mind to make you happy because you're going to be happy.
Yeah, I'm not.
Why are you not happy?
Okay. All right.
But a lot of people have kind of on the TV Tropes website, it's actually listed as fanon discontinuity, where basically the fans are kind of like, let's put this in a drawer and close the drawer and lock the drawer and drop that in the Marianas Trench and not talk about it again.
Let me ask you a question for Tim really quick. So you talked about how this collaboration between you and Brahm really pulled off this awesome, great environment. I'm curious, because at the same time there was also Planescape being developed.
Yeah.
Did the success of Dark Sun, did that influence the collaboration with Tony DiTerlizzi over on Planescape?
I would say decidedly yes. I think it opened up a whole new relationship between designers and artists that, to a certain extent, has really been a sea change in how that whole relationship works and everything at TSR going forward. Planescape was the next big thing that came out, and if you take a look at its wonderful art and trade dress and whatnot, again, it's a whole family of gaming products that all look like they belong together. It's got it's one where we let Tony D and all of the graphics people working on it really stretch their legs and do something that was way off the beaten path. And those are, if you looked at some of those covers, they're so radically different in approach to anything that had gone before that if they'd have been proposed as, here's a cover for a late 80s Forgotten Realms game book, the painting would have been rejected. But because it was so well thought out and choreographed over a whole series of products, and it was just wonderful.
Now, we've had a guy on our show before who is credited with working on Dark Sun as well, Rich Baker.
Sure. Rich did a lot of great work. He does a lot of novels now, a designer in the day, and his work, especially on the Silt, he did the Silt C stuff, I think. Did he? Now I'm getting confused. Boy, this stuff is so long ago.
Just letting you know, he's been on the show before, so we are a big fan of him, and it's cool that he worked on Dark Sun as well.
Yeah, he did a lot of stuff on that, and he was always a very down to earth kind of designer. Whenever I would work with Rich, he seemed to be a guy that could always keep in his head that not only are we writing something that's just art to be read and enjoyed, but that ultimately somebody has to sit down and play this thing. and if I could take another stab at most of the work that I was ever involved with at TSR in those days, I would try to ramp that up a little more. If you take some of our best stuff that we ever put out, I mean, if you read the Al-Qadim book, for instance, that Jeff Grubb wrote,
big fan of that one.
Man, that stuff is is just splendidly written, and it's just a great read. But in hindsight, man, I'll be
what do you
damned
do
if I
with
could
it?
Figured out how to play it.
What do you do with it? Yeah.
Yeah. And we all could have taken a lesson there. And Rich seemed to be a guy who kind of got that right away. And he's just a fun fellow to work with at the same time. So
now, for the listeners, we spent a long time talking about Dark Sun, and it is awesome. It is absolutely brilliant. But at the same time, it has a spiritual successor that you launched, as we said, a year ago, and that's called Dragon Kings. So if you love Athos and you love Dark Sun, what is going to take us over to Dragon Kings? Tell us about how that's the spiritual successor.
My thought there to create Dragon Kings as a spiritual successor to Dark Sun was first, obviously, as I said before, we had all of us in design who had done stuff on Dark Sun, had a lot more ideas of things to do in that sort of an environment. So if I created a thematically similar environment, I could touch on a lot of those ideas. So a lot of the heavy themes are still there. In the Dragon Kings environment, you're still talking about a world that is very much in decline, though for markedly different reasons. But you still got a world where the environment itself is very harsh, where the effort it takes to get by from day to day is very difficult, where your enemies are many and the environment itself is an adversary that you have to confront all of the time. From that, we also have a thematic kind of art look. This is still very much a desert kind of environment. So there's still very much reason to make weapons out of different elements and whatnot than you would in a standard fantasy game. That's why I could get back together with Brahm and he could do the cover and it would look kind of thematically similar.
And the cover is very awesome.
Yeah, I think he just, obviously one of the premier artists in the fantasy genre right now. And every time I get a chance to work with Brahm, I definitely step up to the plate.
So fans of Dark Sun should go check out Dragon Kings because it is the same general feel, the same general tone, right?
Correct. But obviously, in every other facet, we got whole new situations, whole new characters, whole new reasons to be on the side of good or on the side of evil, whole new races, and magic is still bizarre and difficult to cast, but for whole new reasons, and it gives me a whole new playground in which to stretch my legs with old concepts in new places, and I've had a lot of fun with it so far.
It's a Dark Sun feel in a brand new world.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Let's.
I'm checking it out right now.
We're getting close to the end of our show here, so I'm going to have to ask folks for final thoughts. And I can sense Daryl just waiting. He's coiled like he's coiled up like a cobra, ready to strike. Daryl, why don't you give us your final thoughts on Dark Sun?
Like I said, my experience in Dark Sun is mostly it's actually a campaign I didn't get to actually play in. I made a character where in 4th edition D&D, before 5th edition had come out, a friend of mine was running a campaign and they had run up to 10th level. And so I made a 10th level character who was an Avenger, because I wanted to play an Avenger so bad, which, if you know, 4th edition was a divine class, and there are no gods. So I reskinned the entire Avenger class to have all his abilities make sense, just so I could play in Dark Sun, and then I never got to play in the campaign. But but I have gotten to play a couple of 4th edition games here and there in Dark Sun. I've run one, and oh my God, it is, I want to just smack 15-year-old me for dismissing the setting because I don't like desert and worms and stuff. No, the setting is so much fun. There is so much to explore in the world. And just like when we get to the end of every single one of these recordings for our campaign setting series, I want to run a Dark Sun campaign right now.
That's cool.
Brandon, why don't you give us your final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I agree with Daryl wholeheartedly. I would love to grab like 5 people off the street and be like, "Hey, here's Dark Sun. We're playing it, guys." And
hey, Brandon, I'm in.
Well, there's 2, right? One thing that I've been kind of holding off on asking, but was it intentional in the original like concepts and designs that you wanted to make a world where the players were forced to rely upon themselves and not so much, their gods or
magic items.
the environment, the magic items and whatnot? Was that an original like core concept that you were designing around, or was it just something that simply evolved through iteration?
I think it was a core concept in as much as that's just the nature of a pulp adventurer. We drew from pulp sources, primarily on inspiration, where there weren't these wheelbarrows full of magical items that people could just grab and use all the time. That there wasn't necessarily an overarching godlike presence that's just kind of watching over what you're doing, and you can appeal to it any moment to save your butt.
Right.
These things just didn't exist in that kind of a setting, so that they never evolved in the Dark Sun setting either. So it was kind of systematic, if you will.
I see. And I will say I am definitely looking into getting Dragon Kings right now.
Cool.
When are
Well,
you going to
very
make that
much.
available, boss?
You can get the PDFs of it right now. Just go to dragonkingsproject.com. It'll lead you the way to get all of the PDF stuff right away. And unless my guys at Studio 2 are completely off the mark, I'm within 30 days of having that stuff and mailing it out to everybody, and then we'll have it in stores. So
Really
looking forward to that.
It's downloading right now.
And we will have links in the show notes for those of you wanting to find
Okay.
it.
Tim, you're the designer. Give us
Mhm.
your final thoughts on Dark Sun.
Well, it's always nice to get, the perspective of guys like you who want to, sit down and kind of chat about things that I've worked on in the past, including Dark Sun. And, every time I kind of re-examine, decisions that I made, whatever you create, at least I find whatever I create, I can always think, well, I wish I'd have done this, or I wish I'd have done that. And so often it exposes to me, as I think through the details of how I came to this decision or that decision, if we'd only done this, if we'd have only had a little more art to show the different desert landscapes, or if we'd have only focused a little more on the details of actually playing this out as an adventure, on the tabletop. But in the final analysis, it's, you can look back and, it's fun for me to see that over a long period of time, people have enjoyed something that I got to create, and had a lot of fun with it, and it's just always a really enriching experience, and I'm glad I get a chance to talk with guys like you and resurface a lot of that old thinking. It's always fun for me.
That's awesome. Ross, what are your final thoughts? Well, I'm glad you asked. As the host, I get to ask myself questions all the time. It's kind of weird. Tim, first of all, on behalf of Daryl, myself, and Brandon, thank you very much for joining us, because it's great to have a designer talk to us about his creation this way.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Secondly, my final thoughts on Dark Sun. There's really so much more that we allocate 2 hours for the show, but there's just so much more to talk about, really. One of the things I thought was really innovative was the presentation of adventures in Dark Sun was with these interesting flip books that you could flip. You could actually, it was built physically so that you could show the players one side of it, and then the other side of it was for the GM. And every single page on that flip was like that. It was really an interesting and innovative approach to just having something at the table, a tool to kind of help tell the story. You remember that, don't you, Tim? Those flip books?
Oh,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Was that your idea?
We were pioneering that. I was certainly an advocate for it. We were exploring. We felt we had such terrific art to share and such an interesting new sort of look to convey that we wanted to take the art out of the adventure book that was traditionally a book that only the dungeon master got to see, and get it out there so that all the players could enjoy it as the game is going on. So we worked with our manufacturing bookmaking partners and with several different ideas. The flip book was presented, and we did some play testing around with that, and got a generally, everybody who got those things tended to enjoy the experience. We got a lot of positive feedback. But as with so many good innovations, the downside to that was that those came in sort of a fold up little box that held the whole set together. And those boxes did not fare well in a store setting.
No.
They tended to get crushed.
Yeah, they did.
And that, that made them look kind of crummy on the shelf. And people, so we had to eventually abandon that, but it was really just for a marketing and merchandising reason. The experience itself, we always got really nice feedback off of that. And it was a fun way to write an adventure as well, so that
Right.
the piece facing the dungeon master was the the text you needed for the art and stuff that was being displayed on the other side that the players could see. A lot of fun. Enjoyed that.
So, like I said, just continuing with my final thoughts, I love the idea of the survival elements. I think that really changed the whole paradigm of adventuring. It added this whole new aspect to it. My friend and roommate, Sean Patrick Fannin, he played Dark Sun very recently, actually, and he just came home just bubbling about, I played a cleric of water, and I was so important because I could, I had all these spells set aside that just helped us survive. He was creating water and purifying water and creating food. Nice. And just, he was the reason that his group made it through the desert. And he was just so happy about that. He was like, nice. Man, he's like, I've never played a cleric like this where I'm just vital to this actual survival beyond, healing hit points.
Right.
And he adored that.
And that does bring up something that I want to point out to people who are wanting to, after listening to the show, they really want to run a Dark Sun game. Pay attention to what spells can do and what magic items can do, because things as simple as a bag of holding or a decanter of water,
oh my God,
or everlasting rations, those sort of things can break Dark Sun.
Right.
Well, yeah, just quick, get back to my final thoughts here. Really, I think Dark Sun is, again, one of the most imaginative and unusual settings that came out during its time period. Probably, if you look back over the game settings and find like the really out there ones, it was unusual to find this coming from TSR, coming from the source, because they had been so tied to that European paradigm that this was a sea change, as he likes to say. It was very different, and then, of course, followed right by Planescape, which was, again, a very big difference. Which is great. So I loved it, and I'm glad I got to play. The few times that I did play in it, I enjoyed it. I'm glad I got to play, to sort of explore it a little bit, and I want to see more. So those are my final thoughts. Okay, very last thing. Let's ask our guests. Brandon, last time for you. Mm-hmm. Where can we find more about you on the internets?
You can find more about me at, unfortunately, my Twitch channel is now defunct.
Oh, no.
Yes, C&D went that far because of the Amazon thing with Twitch. Yes. So unfortunately, I do not have a Twitch channel anymore, but you can definitely find me at, gamertavern.org/about.
And you might be able to see more Twitch goodness from Brandon at our Twitch channel as Gamers Tavern Show. So twitch.tv/Gamers Tavern Show.
Tim, where can we find out more about you and what you're up to on the internets?
Most of my efforts right now are focused on the whole Dragon Kings project. So everything at dragonkingsproject.com. You can find out quite a bit about what I'm up to. Also, I'm not sure who does it, but somebody created a Wikipedia page for me, so you can just find out something about me there. And it's more or less accurate, so that's good for me.
Are there any conventions you're going to in the near future?
Let's see. I've just got a couple of invites that I'm looking at going to Game Fest in Denver. Where
What?
I've just been invited to.
Well,
yeah.
I'm in Denver.
Oh,
yeah.
If you come to Denver, I am totally. We're gonna go out and have a beer. It's gonna happen.
We're gonna hook up. Yeah, I was just talking to the
I
guys
hear
about that.
I hear you're married, so hooking up may be out of the question.
All true.
Okay.
And then I'm trying to get to a convention in Cologne, Germany, because Ulysses Spila is doing the German translation of Dragon Kings.
Sweet.
I also have,
nice.
This is crazy because I also lined up French, Russian, and Polish, and a Spanish company just got in touch with me today. They want to translate it. So I'm very pleased with the overall success of that launch, and that people are responding to it and seeing that it's a book that they want to get involved with. So anyway, it's a lot of fun.
Well, if you come to Denver, I'll show you a copy of Accursed, and we'll talk about that too.
All right. Hey, sounds good.
Speaking of conventions, we're going to be in Houston for Comic Palooza, which is going to be the weekend of May 22nd. Yeah, guess what? guess what? It'll be my 40th birthday that weekend. Ooh. So we're going to have a hell of a time in Houston. Come join us if you can. The William Thrasher and the Skirmisher Publishing guys are going to have one hell of a party. So,
oh god!
All right, and until next time. one more time, let's give a big, thanks from the Gamers Tavern to Tim Brown for putting up with us talking about Dark Sun for 2 hours.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks a lot.
And until next time, may all your hits be crits.
Finding the correct contact lenses and the perfect frames for the fashionably nerdtastic can be a hassle in the big box stores, so that's why I use AC Lens. From the most fashionable frames and hard-to-find prescription contact lenses to the perfect contacts for your next cosplay, AC Lens has all the bases covered at your fingertips without the hassle of leaving the game table. Just go to gamerstavern.org/AC Lens, LENS. They have amazing offers, including up to $300 in savings for a year's supply of contact lenses, and with a 100% satisfaction guarantee, what's not to like? There's even a special deal for Gamers Tavern listeners, $5 off any contact lens order of $50 or more. They have everything you need to keep your eyes healthy and happy. So check out gamerstavern.org/AC Lens today for all your eye care needs.